morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to accompany you as moderator, and hello as well to our online audience this morning. So, what an inspiring address we did just hear from Tim Jarvis, and that was especially exciting for me because I have just read a fantastic book about Mr. Shackleton, and both Tim's keynote and Shackleton's experiences really do remind us what we can achieve with leadership, as we just heard, with collaboration, with determination, and with a problem-solving mindset. And in this first panel on realizing transformative investment, we want to talk about what we can do if we apply those qualities to the challenge ahead of us. So we were reminded in the opening words this morning about what the goal is. The goal is to leverage private sector involvement, and it's going to need to be innovative private sector involvement. Anything else is not going to get us where we need to go in terms of reaching that 2-degree goal. But what does that look like in practice? In this panel, we want to focus on one particularly concrete challenge, and that is sustainable agriculture. As probably most of us in this room know, that is perhaps the most critical lever that we have to break a vicious cycle that links not only poverty, hunger, and environmental degradation, but also conflict and migration. So we want to talk about the challenges, but also the opportunities that are involved in partnering, in collaborating to leverage finance for climate investment in general, but also sustainable agriculture in particular. And we were also reminded just now about the importance of storytelling, the importance of evidence, and we've got an outstanding panel that's ready to give us some of both, to really bring this down to some very concrete stories. So I'm going to introduce them in just a moment, but again, a reminder, we are looking for your input via our Buzzmaster tool, and we're going to start out by posing a couple of questions to you in the audience later on after our first dialogue amongst all of us on the panel. So that's what's in store, and may I now please ask the panel to join me here on stage? Let's give them a warm round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen, then I'll introduce them. Pablo Perversi, I'm going to put you in the last seat. Okay. John Roome, you are going to be right here, second, that's right. Madame la Ministre, here if you would please. Mr. Draijer next to Mr. Roome, please. Then Mr. Christophersen and Mr. Stewart next to Pablo. Sorry, Mr. Draijer here.
There you go, okay, thank you.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much. So it is a very great pleasure to introduce our panel, beginning with Madame la Ministre, Her Excellency Anne Désirée Ouloto. She is the Minister of Sanitation, Environment and Sustainable Development for Côte d'Ivoire, and she has also held several other ministerial portfolios in her government, both family, women and children, and urban health. So it's a great honor to have you with us, Madam Minister. Next to her is John Roome. He is Senior Director of Climate Change at the World Bank Group. He is leading a team of specialists across the group to advance the World Bank's climate change agenda. And prior to that assignment, he was the World Bank Operations and Strategy Director for Global Practices and Cross-Cutting Solutions, a perfect example of collaboration in practice. Next to him is Wiebe Draijer. He is chairman of the managing board of the cooperative bank Rabobank, which is a global leader in the field of food and agribusiness finance, and he previously served, amongst other positions, as president of the Social and Economic Council of the Netherlands. Great to have you with us. Next to him is seated Tim Christophersen. He's head of the Freshwater, Land and Climate branch at UNEP, and he is also chair of the Global Partnership on Forest and Landscape Restoration. Great to have you with us as well. And then I'm very pleased to welcome two private sector representatives on our panel today. We have Dr. Christopher Stewart, who is head of corporate responsibility and sustainability at the global agribusiness Olam International. He is leading the company's drive to translate its core purpose, which is reimagining global agriculture, he'll tell us what that means a little later, into sustainable business. And finally, a pleasure to welcome here Pablo Perversi. He is Chief Innovation, Sustainability and Quality Officer and a member of the Executive Committee at Barry Callebaut. And it is a leading global player, the leading global player in the manufacture and supply of cocoa and chocolate. So excellent that you can be with us as well. I would like to start out with John Roome, with our host. And as we did here earlier, the bank has launched the Invest4Climate initiative last year to try to drive an ambitious effort to coordinate and also scale up investment. So tell us a little bit more about that initiative, but in particular, how it applies to this field of sustainable agriculture.
Very good. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start from where our opening speakers started, with the first message on the magnitude and urgency of the challenge. Hart Schaefer talked about 100 million people ending up in poverty, 143 million migrants, $500 billion of costs. Secretary of State Bartlett talked about the level of investments that are needed, $90 trillion over 15 years. Secretary of State Fartblatt talked about the urgency and the need to decarbonize by mid-century. And we could see from Tim Jarvis's comment that anything we do now, we're still going to lose glaciers, so we're going to have to be adaptive and resilient. So all of that creates an urgency to move forward. We also heard that public finance is not enough. We've got to mobilize private finance. And as one of the earlier speakers also said, there's millions, trillions of dollars of private finance that's earning very low rates of interest. The challenge and the background behind this Invest4Climate idea is how do you find ways of bringing this large amount of private sector financing earning low rates of interest and match it with the business opportunities and the urgency and the scale of the investment opportunity. And so the idea is, how do we institute policy change, reform, institutional capacity building, and combine that with different forms of financing, public and private, in order to drive transformational change. And the framework we think about this has three pieces. On the one hand, you have to create the demand and the capability to make these investments. And so that's where the NDCs, creating bankable projects, getting the right policy environment in place is absolutely critical. Second thing is working on the supply side. That's working with financial sector institutions. We talked a lot yesterday about greening the financial sector, getting the right regulatory pieces in place. And then the third piece is intermediation. How do you bring this finance together with the opportunities? And there it's around issues of de-risking some of these investments. First loss provisions, guarantees, aggregating, standardizing products in order to make this more efficient. Let me make this a little bit real with an easier example before I come to agriculture, and look at the case of India renewable energy in the state of Madhya Pradesh. For the longest time, coal was by far the cheapest source of power, and by structuring a deal in the state of Madhya Pradesh, they managed to put together 700 megawatts of renewable energy at grid parity with coal. That means they could supply energy from a renewable energy plant at the same cost that they could get it out of a coal-fired power plant, which is revolutionary in terms of making it through. How did they make that happen? First of all, a well-structured deal so that you could reduce the risk for the private investors. What does that mean? One of the risks that investors face in the power sector is, are they going to get paid? They're worried about the viability of the off-taker. What they did was to structure a series of guarantees, but also to structure it so that they sold 50% of the power directly to the Delhi Metro Board, which had a much higher credit rating than the general off-takers, general distributions. Second concern they're worried about is, will the infrastructure be there and the evacuation lines be there? So we, from the World Bank Group, financed that infrastructure up front, so that by the time the bids came to install the solar panels, that infrastructure was there, the resettlement had been dealt with, the land acquisition had been dealt with. Third, people wondered about contract stability. In designing the contract documents and the power purchase agreements, huge consultation on every single clause with potential people that are going to come into this deal. So by putting this package together, they were able to move forward. But this is only one step. This is just one state. They want to get to 170 gigawatts of renewable energy in India. And so now we're thinking about what other kinds of systemic guarantees can we put in place in India for low credit-worthy states and in other parts of the world. And some of the side events that we'll be talking about today are talking about exactly these kinds of things. The challenge, and the reason we focus this panel on agriculture and agribusiness, is that in many cases, the challenge is even more difficult in agriculture and in landscapes, but equally important. Let's go back to some numbers here. We've got 7 billion people on the planet now, plus or minus. By the middle of the century, plus or minus 9 billion. That's going to mean 70% more food, or at least more nutrition that we're going to need. We've got to step up to that. These people are going to be middle income. More people are going to want to eat meat. We know that's got a higher carbon footprint. We already know that right now, we've got 1 billion people obese and 1 billion people malnourished. We've got to address that simultaneously. We also know climate change is going to drive down productivity 15 to 25% unless we can find different ways of instituting climate-smart agriculture. And we know that the agriculture and landscapes sector could be up to 30% of GHG emissions, particularly as we decarbonize the energy sector. So we've got a huge opportunity and a huge challenge here to bring together the private sector and the public sector to mimic what I just talked about in Madhya Pradesh and translate that into the agriculture and landscape sector, bearing in mind that we're well behind it. Landscapes and agriculture could be 30% of the solution. It's only getting 3% of the financing now. We've got a long way to go. And while I can talk about an offtake agreement in renewable energy and one big buyer, one big manufacturer, in the case of landscapes, in the case of agriculture, you're talking about lots of smallholders, lots more politically difficult issues to deal with, so there's lots of challenges. So I want to try and set this up as the opportunity and then allow the experts from this field to talk about how we can drive this agenda forward, this Invest4Climate agenda forward in the agriculture and landscape space.
Thanks so much. So picking right up on an example of that kind of public-private cooperation, we've got two experts seated next to you, as it were. UNEP partnering with Rabobank on a $1 billion endeavor called Kickstart Food. So an endeavor in the field of sustainable agriculture to try to get that kind of collaboration going. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Mr. Draijer? What are the aims? What are you expecting to achieve?
Yeah, Melinda, thank you for that opportunity. And please permit me to talk a little bit about food, not so much about a bank or finance or CO2. Food, as I think you illustrated so nicely, John, is about 1/3 of the climate problem. Also, when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, it is the next frontier. Climate is the big topic in the Sustainable Development Goals. The next frontier is food, because it affects so many of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are one of the biggest banks in the world in the food supply chains, and hence our mission is to help grow a better world through improving the food supply to the world. And what it takes is actually to reach individual farmers in Brazil, in Africa, in Indonesia. So the whole big numbers game translates ultimately to reaching individual farmers. And these farmers we serve. We serve about 5 million individual farmers in Africa. We serve the biggest share of the farmers in Brazil when they come to the frontier of the deforestation, and in Indonesia. So our responsibility is to help them converge. And so we started looking at what does it take to get those farmers to change their practices, the practices that are needed to do what John so eloquently described, more productive ways, more sustainable ways of producing agricultural produce. And it turns out we have been working with these farmers for many, many years, and we tracked their sustainable development practices. So we have a database, we have a repertoire of connecting to financing farmers information of whether or not they do adhere to sustainable practices. And so we thought of a way of, can we connect to ways to get those farmers to invest in more sustainable practices? Now, investing in climate is good business, as I also indicated on the sheet, and it is good business. But the trouble is, the intermediate stage of shifting your practice today to tomorrow does take an uncertain period, and for that you need some incentives. And so we found a great partner in the United Nations Environment Programme to think about, can we build in incentives for the individual farmer to have him or her shift to the different practices. And these take some years to invest, and so we finance the farmer, but with the help of the United Nations Environment, we find ways of incentivizing those farmers, individual farmers around the world. And for that, we have together put an investment umbrella of about $1 billion in which we can help real farmers, individual farmers, millions of farmers to shift their practices. And that has been this partnership. And frankly, we've only started it. Now the trick is to invite more public partners into it to fund it, and more private sector partners to help align. Because when that happens, when, for example, the players like Callebaut, who we'll talk to later, or the Unilevers of the world, buy the sustainable produce of these farmers, you have the best mix. You have the public sector incentivizing, you have the financing sector to invest, the farmer to change, and then the private sector to buy the more sustainably produced agriculture. That's what we do. That's what this Kickstart program is about. And that's why we're so excited to be able to share it here on stage to get to an even bigger footprint.
Thank you so much. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a question to you on precisely that subject later on in the panel about exactly what you think that the farmers need from those who are working in the field of development partnership. So let's move on to UNEP. And UNEP's head actually said at the time of the Kickstart Foods launch that it, quote, aims at nothing less than becoming the new normal for the finance industry, which needs, he said at the time, to transform its entire approach to agribusiness, agriculture, lending. So that's a pretty urgent and ambitious message. I wonder if you would just tell us a little bit more from your point of view, Mr. Christophersen, about that partnership with Rabobank and how you see that working out from UNEP's point of view.
Certainly, Tim Jarvis just reminded us on an enormous journey you need to take stock once in a while, and we do that every year with what is called the emissions gap report. The latest one estimates we're still having an emissions gap for the 2-degree targets of about 11 to 13 gigatons by the year 2030. The good news is that land use can fill a third is the conservative estimate. It could fill up to half of this if we are smarter about agriculture, if we stop tropical deforestation. So this, for us, is the next big thing in climate action. It only receives 3% of climate finance presently, so that has to change. The partnership with Rabobank is a beginning. $1 billion in a city of finance does not sound that much in a $1.7 trillion agri-commodity industry, but what is important is the beginning and the visibility of that beginning. Somebody has to be the first mover. We're very happy and grateful to Rabobank that they stepped up, but certainly we want to see that expand and shift the trajectory of the industry as a whole to embark on this new opportunity. We've certainly, there's a lot of renewable energy experts in the room, I think, and if you think back 15 years, investments in renewable energy in developing countries, investment funds, project developers, they would hardly give you the time of day to talk about solar, wind, hydro in Uganda or Kenya. Nowadays, these are investments that don't need public support anymore. And we're at the same stage now with sustainable land use. We need some initial public push to lower the perceived and the real risk thresholds for investors, for big banks to come in. But sooner rather than later, we hope this will become the new normal indeed. And it has to become the new normal, not only for climate change, but also for zero hunger, clean water, and life on land, which are the other key climate goals that hinge on the food, energy, and water nexus.
Just very briefly, if you would, in terms of that nexus between agriculture and climate change, what do you see as the most crucial sectors, products, regions? I promised we'd make it concrete, and I'm trying to head now into the very concrete indeed. So what for you would be the absolute top priorities?
In terms of numbers of climate change, it's clearly soy, palm oil, beef, and livestock. 70 to 80% of tropical deforestation is caused by those commodities. In the 400 global consumer goods forum companies, only 25% have zero deforestation policies. Only 3% of the finance industry that underwrites all that trade has zero deforestation policies. That needs to change, and we're pushing, obviously, the industry as a whole also into more commitments. In some cases, there will be stricter regulation, but as we said, there has to be some early movement as well, some of the actors to show what is the way out, what is the business unusual, and what needs to become the new normal. And this is what we're trying to set up with the Forest Protection and Sustainable Agriculture Fund. And we would welcome other banks, but also other public backers to join us.
Thank you very much. So moving on now to Olam and to Mr. Stewart, your own company also has a pretty ambitious goal, nothing less than reimagining global agriculture. And in that context, you just last month published a new policy, Living Landscapes is the name of it. And I wonder if you can tell us what exactly you're committing to there and why.
Thank you very much. My CEO normally delivers this in 2 hours, and there's not a word wasted, so this is a bit of a challenge to do this in 2 minutes.
You've got about 2 minutes.
Yes, exactly. So Olam isn't a household name, but we are one of the world's leading global agribusinesses with products such as cotton, cocoa, coffee, timber, rubber, palm, rice, and many others, and we're widely distributed around the world. We have a footprint of about 4.7 million suppliers, the vast majority of which are smallholder farmers in those crops, and many of them are in some of the poorest countries in the world and face very deep challenges. As you heard from the previous panelists, we need also, as a supplier, we are facing up to the fact that we need to produce far more food for the rising human population, and yet we need to reduce our overall impact because we're already breaching planetary boundaries. So the promise of global food business is to do less harm on an ever bigger scale is actually not going to meet that challenge. And that's why we believe that we have to reimagine global agriculture. We don't have a complete vision of how that's got to be done, but what we do know is that that has to involve rebuilding natural capital value in many of the places that we work, because that natural capital value is what is ensuring the long-term sustainability of supply. So when we set out our vision for reimagining global agriculture, we have 3 big goals. Those goals are to ensure the economic viability of the farmer suppliers, ensure that the farmer suppliers, that the rural economy and the communities that they live in have the sort of services that allow and encourage people to stay in farming. And we also have to address the ecosystem forests around those farming systems that supply them with the life support system and the ecosystem services that allow farming to continue. And this is a very real thing that's happening right now. You know, in the 2 most important cocoa origins in the world, Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, the global climate change and local climate change due to catastrophic forest loss, it has been squeezing the forest belts. Productivity is dropping, and that's a real day-to-day problem to the smallholders who are the basis of that supply chain. And it's the same is true of many other crops. So we believe that we have to invest in regenerative agriculture. We believe that we can't tackle the problems of deforestation. Many of the consumer goods companies, the big global companies, have made 2020 zero deforestation targets, as we've heard. We don't believe that we can meet those targets unless we address the underlying drivers of deforestation, and that varies from place to place. So we have to look at the poverty issue, we have to look at the rural economy, and we have to look at the political vision of what landscapes look like. And I think that there is now a consensus building around the jurisdictional approach, around a multi-stakeholder approach to these problems, putting in place platforms with governments, civil society, and companies to reach these sort of targets. So what we're going to do as a company, we're going to continue investing, as we have been doing on a large scale, in our own supply chains, but we are also encouraging and trying to catalyze these multi-stakeholder groups to come together, because individual companies can't solve this by ourselves. We have to act as a group in order to solve these big intractable problems.
So if I can just summarize what we've heard until now, we've heard about the crucial need for systemic approaches that link up stakeholders, but we've also heard about the crucial need for systemic vision that sees those three aspects of sustainability as joined up, meaning the social, the economic, and the environmental, because all of you are essentially telling us that without social sustainability, we can't get the other pieces in place. Now let's make it very concrete indeed. We're moving ever closer to two particular concrete examples, cocoa and Côte d'Ivoire. I want to take cocoa first, and of course, I think all of us in the room who follow these either professionally or because we love chocolate, which would be true for me, have heard with concern the projections that we may be looking at a worldwide shortage of chocolate sometime within the next few years. So I'd like to ask, first of all, Mr. Perversi to give us a picture of how he sees the long-term climate risks to cocoa production, what your company is doing to mitigate those risks, particularly as they occur in West Africa, and what you see as most crucial for enhancing stability and sustainability across the entire production network for cocoa.
Okay, I'll try to answer that in 2 minutes.
That's right.
Despite it's like 5 questions.
It's brutal.
The first thing is be sure that the pleasure that cocoa actually brings to people will continue, and that's exactly why we've started Forever Chocolate. I think the causes that are very clear of what's going to happen in the future are also clear to everybody. I mean, we don't need more scientists to tell us. We don't need more expeditions. We know. We just need to get into action and start doing some things. And the truth of the matter is that at Barry Callebaut, we've already said we want to make sustainable chocolate the norm for 2025. And there's a number of things that we've started working on very conscientiously to try and make absolutely sure we get to that target. And we started working on those in different fronts. On carbon and forest positive, we've actually moved a heck of a long way. And proof of that is the way that we're actually starting to work, trying to bring together the industry, trying to bring together the governments, trying to bring everybody together so that we make agreements like the Cocoa Framework Initiative, which is starting to yield some action. We've already stopped deforesting. We've started in terms of trying to map countries of where we need to actually source from. And hopefully by 2019, we will actually have in place a way of traceability so that we know exactly that our cocoa is safe from deforestation. And I think this is a very important stepping stone in terms of trying to create impact moving forward. But as we've actually just said, there's actually a lot of things that we need to do in a systemic way. We can't just work all in silos and not bring together the whole ecosystem that affects farms, that affects society, that affects living income for many of the people that actually derive their incomes from all of these places. I have to say that when we're actually talking about improving productivity, which is a key precursor to raising and lifting farmers out of poverty, we have to do this in a conscientious way. And there's a big vacuum that is currently there at the moment in order to do this in proper ways. Because not all countries have all the services necessary for farmers to continue improving productivity. And not only that, but if we provide those services to the farmers in terms of replanting, in terms of making the soil better through good fertilizers, pesticides, whatever you actually want, or even the machinery for replanting and providing the labor for this, it costs some money. So this doesn't all come without a bill to actually pay. And in many cases, farmers need microcredit to have access to all of this. And the truth of the matter is that today, in order for farmers to have access to microcredit, there's a lot of impediments. Now, just to put this into context, if Barry Callebaut went at it alone, and we've started it, so we already have some capital that we've actually put to this, the cost to Barry Callebaut in terms of working capital will be $250 million US, which is a lot of money for the type of profit that we actually make every year if we had to carry this in our balance sheet. And the risk associated to the non-payment of the loans would actually be very big if you actually multiply times the number of farmers that we actually have. So it has to be an industry concerted effort that we work together with our finance partners, with all the different other institutions, so that we take the risk away, but we continue to drive the impact in the right things that need to be done. And I think this is actually a crucial thing for us in terms of going forward and what we need to play. But it's not just a financial sector issue. In some of the countries where we work, land tenure is not necessarily there. We don't necessarily have birth certificates. So for even if you are a banking institution and you want to loan money, sometimes you don't know who you're lending the money to because you don't have a securitization on the land. You don't actually know who the person is because they don't actually register. So there are some things that we have to continue working together. And I am very encouraged by the fact that we've started. There's great progress. The fact that we've brought people together brings great dialogue. And the fact that we've started doing it shows that we can get a long way. And if you see some of the farm development programs that we've started doing, we're already seeing 20, 23, 25% of increases in productivity where we do it. And that actually now needs to be scaled up with all the capabilities that we have in order to do that.
Thank you so much. So let us come now to Côte d'Ivoire. And Madam Minister, at last year's UN Climate Change Conference right here in Germany, top cocoa producing countries, including Côte d'Ivoire, announced, together with leading commercial producers, some very far-reaching frameworks for action with the aim of ending deforestation. So I'd like to ask if you could tell us a little bit, please, about this Cocoa and Forests Initiative and what practical action your government is taking quite directly to support its commitments on this.
Mais je voudrais vous remercier pour cette belle opportunité que vous offrez à notre pays de manifester son leadership. On a parlé tout à l'heure de leadership, c'est important. Et surtout notre ambition de préserver notre culture du cacao, de protéger nos forêts, mais surtout de continuer donc à lutter contre la pauvreté et faire en sorte que nos populations s'épanouissent dans cette dynamique pour une Côte d'Ivoire émergente tant souhaitée par notre président, le président de la République. Il est bon de rappeler que la culture du cacao est pour la Côte d'Ivoire une option politique stratégique forte. Parce que le cacao, c'est en termes de contribution, il faut le rappeler, 20% du produit intérieur brut, 50% de nos recettes d'exportation. À partir de la culture du cacao, vous avez au moins 6 millions de familles qui vivent de cette culture du cacao. Et puis, naturellement, plus de 1,5 milliard donc, d'apports pour l'économie nationale par an, ce qui n'est pas rien, c'est important. Nous devons donc protéger notre cacao, qui fait la fierté de la Côte d'Ivoire. Comment protéger le cacao quand nous avons de grands défis? La déforestation, on en a parlé tout à l'heure, la pression, la forte demande internationale. Le monde entier aime le chocolat. Tout le monde, partout je vois partout en Europe, en Amérique, en Asie, tout le monde aime le chocolat. Eh bien, le chocolat vient de quelque part et le chocolat coûte à nos pays en termes de déforestation. Et les mauvaises pratiques enregistrées par le passé, l'histoire récente de notre pays qui a connu une longue décennie de crise, malheureusement, tout cela a eu un impact négatif sur nos forêts. Nous avons perdu énormément de superficie donc, de forêts. Et aujourd'hui, le défi, si nous voulons préserver notre ressource cacaoyère, il nous faut avoir une politique volontariste pour lutter contre la déforestation et recouvrer notre couvert forestier pour la Côte d'Ivoire d'au moins 20%. D'au moins 20% dans les 20 années à venir. Et cela, pour tout cela, nous avons besoin donc d'un fort engagement politique. La Côte d'Ivoire a engagé après de nombreuses initiatives et a marqué son engagement fort à travers plusieurs initiatives. Nous avons, par exemple, je pourrais le dire, l'engagement de la Côte d'Ivoire au mécanisme RED+, pour lutter donc contre la réduction des gaz à effet de serre. Nous avons, dans le cadre de ce mécanisme RED+, nous avons une stratégie nationale RED+, qui va nous aider donc à renforcer les capacités de nos producteurs et à faire en sorte que nous puissions donc lutter contre la déforestation, je l'ai dit, et rattraper donc notre retard en la matière. Nous avons également, en termes d'engagement pour préserver notre forêt, nous avons un nouveau code forestier en Côte d'Ivoire. Tout cela qui tire, si vous voulez, sa source, donc son inspiration de notre engagement au mécanisme RED+. Nous avons également, au-delà de ce code forestier, nous avons une nouvelle politique forestière en Côte d'Ivoire qui d'ailleurs a été adoubée par un conseil présidentiel donc, conduit par le président de la République. Cette nouvelle politique forestière qui nous emmènera donc dans un avenir assez proche à réhabiliter toutes nos forêts, notamment dans les zones forestières, les parcs, les réserves et les forêts classées. La grande problématique, c'est l'agression au niveau des forêts classées. Et aujourd'hui, nous avons donc à travers cette nouvelle politique forestière toute une démarche pour réhabiliter toutes nos forêts et pour renforcer donc la protection de nos parcs et réserves. Nous avons donc également, en termes d'action forte, un programme national d'investissement agricole qui est à sa deuxième génération. Nous avons également une stratégie pour une agriculture intelligente. Une agriculture intelligente qui nous permettra donc de renforcer les capacités de tous les acteurs donc, en la matière, notamment les petits producteurs. Nous aurons également, à travers cette stratégie, la possibilité, n'est-ce pas, de produire plus en évitant donc cette agriculture extensive qui, malheureusement, a contribué à la destruction de nos forêts. Mieux, nous avons également, et ça, je pense que c'est une initiative importante, la mise en commun de tous les efforts à travers les initiatives cacao-forêt, l'implication et la participation du secteur privé, donc aux côtés du secteur public, de l'État de Côte d'Ivoire, avec également la participation de la société civile, du monde agricole, donc des producteurs, n'est-ce pas? Et c'est dans cette synergie d'action, de manière inclusive et participative, que la Côte d'Ivoire entend, n'est-ce pas, corriger toutes les imperfections, tirer les leçons, donc les bonnes pratiques, je devrais dire, de toutes les initiatives que nous avons déjà enregistrées jusqu'à présent. Et donc, voici un peu, j'ai très peu de temps, comment la Côte d'Ivoire compte continuer son histoire avec son cacao. Je dis son cacao parce que nous sommes les champions au monde donc, de la production du cacao. Comment nous voulons garantir la durabilité dont vous avez parlé tout à l'heure pour faire en sorte que tous ces adeptes de chocolat ne manquent pas de chocolat demain. Comment faire en sorte, dans le même temps, que nous puissions, nous, pays producteurs, préserver nos forêts et continuer donc de garantir l'épanouissement de nos populations qui, en milieu rural, vivent de la production du cacao et de la forêt.
Merci beaucoup. Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to come to you to get your opinion. And Michael, I'm going to suggest that we take both of our questions to the audience at the same time, both of those audience polls. So let's do them together, and then we'll come back to get some reaction from the panel, and then we will start opening up for the questions from the audience. But let's first give them a question or two.
Okay. First question we have for you, so get your phones out, is the following. What does the private sector need from the public sector to invest in low-carbon resilient cocoa? And the answers are, I'll read them out because they're difficult to read. A better legal framework, e.g. for example, for land use, enforcement of existing laws and regulations, cooperation amongst producer countries for a stable supply, that's cooperation amongst producer countries for a stable supply, transparency on prices and taxation, and a safety net for small farmers. They're also up on the screen, as you can see, and you're also able to answer there.
Maybe let's just give them a moment to think about that, because I see a lot of votes are still coming in.
I think the safety net for small farmers is interesting. It's also what Mr. Parevi was getting at.
And we're coming to something related to that. Again, that goes back to that question of the nexus between the different dimensions of sustainability.
Yeah, these are about the percentages.
Good. Okay. So social sustainability coming here pretty strongly among those potential answers. Okay, maybe in the interest of time, we move on to the second audience question, and then we'll see what the panel thinks.
Okay. What should be the top investment priority to promote sustainable cocoa farming and production? What should be the top investment priority to promote sustainable cocoa farming and production? Is that training and access to tech for farmers? Financial inclusion for farmers, education and access to education for youth in cocoa-producing regions, and premium payments for certified cocoa products. Financial inclusion for farmers. There are no education fans. Yes, there's one. Training and tech for farmers. Be interesting to see how tech can really impact farming. Yeah, well,
okay.
There you have it, pretty much.
Many thanks. Let me, first of all, ask the Minister to please comment on either or both of those results, but particularly when private sector actors are coming to you, dear Minister, what is it that they are most looking for from you, from the government, to deliver, to really help them to leverage more investment in sustainable agriculture generally, but of course especially cocoa?
Merci. Votre question est essentielle. Elle est essentielle parce que le gouvernement a autant besoin du secteur privé. Parce que c'est le secteur privé qui rachète le cacao et qui donc le transforme en chocolat. Et c'est ce secteur privé qui permet donc à nos producteurs via le gouvernement de lutter contre la pauvreté et de faire en sorte que nous puissions donc bénéficier, si vous voulez, d'une cohésion sociale et de la paix. Quand les populations vivent épanouies et heureuses, eh bien, vous avez la paix. Le gouvernement a donc intérêt à créer un cadre qui soit favorable donc, au business des chocolatiers. Mais sans toutefois nuire à notre forêt qui constitue cette source qui permet la production du cacao. Et nous voulons d'un cacao propre, d'un cacao décarbonisé pour qu'il y ait chocolat décarbonisé. Pour ce faire, le gouvernement crée les conditions de collaboration à travers des plateformes. Et donc cette initiative Cacao Forêt, pour nous, apparaît comme une plateforme incontournable. Nous avons besoin aujourd'hui, à travers, donc, dans le cadre de synergie d'action, de travailler donc, ensemble dans une démarche, si vous voulez, contraignante, de part et d'autre, et pour le gouvernement et pour le secteur privé. Nous avons besoin de mobiliser des ressources, suffisamment de ressources. Le gouvernement apporte donc sa contribution, mais le secteur privé devrait également contribuer donc à financer le secteur à travers le renforcement des capacités de tous les acteurs nationaux, mais les producteurs également. Tout cela nous permettra donc de respecter nos engagements dans le cadre, par exemple, du mécanisme RED+, dans le cadre également de nos engagements pour le climat. Et ainsi, nous nous engagerons donc dans cette démarche de garantie de chocolat durable et d'agriculture durable et intelligente pour notre pays, pour la Côte d'Ivoire, qui aura forcément également un impact positif sur le bien-être de nos concitoyens. C'est ensemble que nous devons lutter également contre certains fléaux, les pires formes de travail des enfants. Et on l'a vu, le secteur du chocolat s'est engagé également aux côtés des initiatives dans notre pays, conduites par exemple par Madame la Première Dame en matière de lutte contre les pires formes de travail des enfants. Tout cela pour garantir la qualité du chocolat qui est proposé donc aux consommateurs. Je voudrais en tout cas rassurer et dire que pour la Côte d'Ivoire, cette réforme à laquelle nous assistons et qui a été consacrée depuis 2011 par la gouvernance du président Ouattara, donc en garantissant la réforme du secteur cacao avec le Conseil Café-Cacao qui garantit donc la gouvernance de la gestion du cacao, tout cela crée un climat favorable, n'est-ce pas, au rapprochement entre le secteur public et le secteur privé, garantit également la prise en compte des préoccupations des producteurs, notamment des produits producteurs, et crée naturellement un climat favorable, n'est-ce pas, à la culture et à l'industrialisation, à la vente, à la commercialisation donc, du cacao. Je pense que c'est de cette manière-là que le gouvernement peut contribuer, n'est-ce pas, à améliorer le climat avec les chocolatiers et à garantir donc, cette culture du cacao qui, pour nous, constitue une richesse importante.
Merci bien. So I would like to now, because I've got an eye on the time and we're very tight and I want to still get in at least some of the audience questions that are coming in. Let me now come to the three private sector representatives on the panel. And first of all, get your brief, please, response to those two audience reactions. And essentially, I'll just remind us of what they were. So the first question was, what does the private sector need from the public sector to invest? And most of the audience thought that the most helpful things would be either improved legal frameworks, including land use, planning, and environmental regulations, and or safety nets for farmers. And our second question essentially was about the safety nets. So what we need to deliver what transformative finance can deliver in order to essentially address that social sustainability piece of it. And here's the reminder of what the audience thought there. Financial inclusion definitely coming out strongest in that audience poll. So for you three from the private sector, starting perhaps with Mr. Perversi as the chocolate man, if you could just briefly give us your reaction to that.
Melinda, let me just say one thing, actually. The best tunes on a piano are not played with one key, they're played with various keys. And I think this actually represents a little bit of that, yeah? We can't actually just focus on one thing and say that's the most important. There are things, however, that are very important. Without the framework for action on forest, it is very difficult to progress on deforestation. And without the enforcement of it, even worse. So I think that is actually a really, really important thing. If we're talking about farmers and what they need as a safety net, they need some financial risk management or guarantees that are going to allow them to embrace microcredit and all the framework that actually comes with it. But it's not a one key that actually makes the melody. It's a number of different things that we need to work together on.
But essentially sharing the audience's point of view there on both, but also underlining the enforcement part, which is, of course, a capacity issue, very important indeed. Mr. Stewart.
I think one of the most important things for us is to understand where the risk lies in this enterprise. And there are many sources of risk. There's political, environmental, social risk, market risk, supplier risk, and there are different tools for addressing all of those. I think one of the most important things for us is actually to have a guiding political vision of what what the country and the main stakeholders want to achieve in that sector, and then putting into place the framework around that. So whether it's the framework of laws and enforcement, whether it's the land use plan and the understanding of where the vision of production is going to be and how that's going to progress, these things need to be in place, and that allows the private sector then to prioritize its own investments and seek to leverage other investments into the public good aspects. I think it's very important for the people in this room to understand that those of us who are originators and traders in commodities are often operating on extremely narrow margins of a few percent, and it's extremely difficult on that basis with the risk to be investing in more than the efficiency of your own supply chain and the quality and the yield of your suppliers. That is something that we can do and that we are very good at doing. What we need to do and learn how to do is to leverage that investment with the investment into the public good piece, which I think everybody has expressed a deep concern about, which is the climate change, deforestation, degradation. And that really is where we need to be working together.
So essentially, you're taking us back to Jarvis, saying you're looking for leadership along all of those various dimensions that were mentioned. And of course, the frameworks do certainly go in that direction. They also address this piece about cooperation amongst producer countries as well. Mr. Draijer.
Well, the old dichotomy is that the private sector will be looking at subsidies, but I don't think that is actually needed. I think what is needed is stability, a regulatory framework in which investments can take place, and some sort of support and guarantee structure. That's what the public sector could do and could bring. Then there is enough money. There is enough money to invest in sustainable practices in the agricultural sector. The trick is to create an environment in which there is a reliable place to do it. And let me just address one thing which I think could be a little bit of an elephant in the room. This is smallholder farmers. Because smallholder, I think the whole the real change pivots around the smallholder farmer, the small farmer. And there are some good questions in the audience questions about how are they sustainable. Frankly, are big farms sustainable? Yes, they are. The trouble is smallholder farmers frequently are not. And they don't have the money and resources to invest. And so what we need to help them build scale so that they can invest in sustainable practices. And one way to do that is, for example, by creating cooperative structures. And what we're doing at a large scale in Africa is helping support creating of cooperative structures around smallholder farmers through which they then have scale to invest in things that they could otherwise not. But I think the discussion really should pivot around how can we help support, incentivize, and aid the smallholder farmer to make the shift happen. That's where it really happens. And if you take cooperatives in a sense also as financial inclusion, would you agree with the majority of the audience saying that would be the key tool there? It's a good mechanism because, well, we are a cooperative and some questions are also around how can a private sector or a listed company invest. We think a cooperative has a long-term nature in mind. They could also create some safety nets for the participating smallholder farmers to help each other through the more difficult stages of the cycle. Let me now very briefly ask for a reaction from our two development partner speakers on the panel. First of all, Mr. Christophersen, and then very briefly, if you would, Mr. Roome, and then we will come to those audience questions that are flowing in here.
In addition to what's been said, I think one additional magic ingredient is new partnerships and spreading the risk in moving into this new field of sustainable agricultural investments. We helped a consortium with another big bank, BNP Paribas, in February to launch a $95 million sustainable landscapes bond for a 400,000 hectare landscape in Indonesia around a forest national park to establish re-establish a degraded natural rubber plantation. The companies, in this case Michelin and others, had that concession for 7 years, but they could not raise the finance because the risk was perceived as too high. They've been working with WWF to solve all these difficult monitoring questions. They had a cooperative, 18,000 smallholder farmers, but they could not raise the finance because the risk was perceived as too high. So coming in with some public money, providing a credit risk guarantee, lower the perceived risk threshold for the first tranche was a key ingredient. And I think we're not looking for subsidies indeed, but there has to be some initial push from the public sector in public-private partnerships and bringing together all the stakeholders that are now nicely lined up here on the stage, for example, in new partnerships to bring finance to these difficult areas, into these new ways of sustainable landscape investments.
John Roome, one last sentence, and then I want to try to work in at least a few of these questions.
Yeah, very good. Policy and framework important, and enforcement absolutely critical. Second thing, fully support subsidies are not the issue. It's about offsetting the risk, but it's not just passing the risk to anybody else. We need to figure out who can best manage those risks, because we need to reduce those risks, and those people that can best manage the risks are the ones to do it. Leadership is essential, and I think part of the leadership characteristic that's important here is bringing the different stakeholders together. It's not just any one institution leading for themselves, but creating this environment, because all of these questions have different solutions in different geographic areas. And so finding ways of collaboratively creating some collaborative leadership to drive this agenda forward is very important.
Thank you very much. Michael.
Yeah. There's this question by Felix. I'm not sure how much time I have. We're just going to run with it. How does the rate of return of a listed company go together with smallholder needs and necessity to stop expanding the agricultural area? And I imagine that's landmass. By Felix. Is that correct, Felix? Phone's blinking. Hand up. Yeah. Is this clear for you guys? And if so, take the lead.
Maybe goes to Mr. Perversi. I might.
Sorry? Yeah, Mr. Pereira.
Look, we cannot do anything without the source of ingredient. So at the end of the day, we need to actually work with smallholder farmers, because they are actually providing the ingredients that we need in the industry. Whether we can work in a better way so that we help them improve their profitability, I think is what we've actually tried to discuss over here. And that's our commitment at Callebaut in terms of making sure that we lift farmers out of poverty through the productivity plans and the farm development plans, and through the financing, which is what we've actually just been discussing.
Cool. Related to that is the small farming operations are difficult to monitor. How do you suggest we do so? You just mentioned cooperatives as one way. Are there any other suggestions that you can think of?
Great. Thank you.
I think technology is revolutionizing how we interact with smallholder farmers and suppliers. I mean, we can do things now that 10 years ago we could barely have dreamed of. Within our own company, we have a farmer information system. We've got over 170,000 farmers registered within that system. We know their names, how many children they have, how much land they have, how many trees they have on that land, how much yield they're getting from that land. It's a fantastic amount of data, and we actually deploy teams in country whose job it is to interact with those farmers either individually or within the cooperatives. And then we can combine that with the new traceability tools, RFID, and with the sort of large-scale satellite mapping tools to have an extremely powerful set of data to address sustainability issues. Because when you know the distribution of your suppliers, you can also start to dig into why is this one doing better than another, why has this region got bigger carbon impact, and looking into the distance. For instance, you can look at the distance between your suppliers and schools or water points or healthcare, and you can start to address the key issues, which are the thriving community issues, which is, we know, for instance, that if you're more than 5 kilometers from a school in a developing country like Côte d'Ivoire or Ghana, then your risk of child labor increases massively. So all of these tools and technologies are now coming together in order to give us a much richer picture of our own supply chain, but it does require quite a lot of investment, obviously, to keep that data up to date and to have the teams on the ground that continuously refresh and deliver the services to the smallholders.
Great, thanks. I think we have time for 2 more. Or 1 more?
Maybe 1 more. I made a firm promise to Femi, and since trust is so important, I want to keep my promise, but maybe 1 more really short one.
Okay, and these are actually 3 questions, but let's just take the first one then. How relevant are smaller private investors, and how to motivate them to get on board?
Who would like to take a stab at that? Mr. Draijer.
I could. I think one of the raison d'être, the reasons why banks are there, is because they connect smaller investors to good causes. At least that's what we think about. And so I think smaller private investors are crucial to making this happen. But frequently you see them channeled through banks that they can provided that they channel the investments in the right way. Here again, new technologies are offering new opportunities for small investors to participate in smaller projects too. And I think there is some opportunity for that. But really, the scaling up that banks can do is the way that we can help organize smaller private investors. There is an opportunity for technology, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding type solutions. They typically apply to smaller areas, and the bridge from small investors all the way to smaller farmers is a long, long way to go. I think the banks should be the sourcing of it or the channeling of it.
Thank you very much. Let me just hand back to John Roome for perhaps one last message summing it all up. Seems to me that we've heard an awful lot about what collaboration can do to try to scale up the sort of investment we need.
So the final thought that I would have is that I'm actually extremely optimistic at this point in time that we can progress this agenda. This discussion we had now would not have happened 2 or 3 years ago. If you just look at where the discussion has gone, the number of people in the room, I think we've got a very well-defined set of understanding of what the problem is. We've got a lot of players that want to come together, and so I think I'm very optimistic that we can start driving this agenda forward much quicker. And from the World Bank Group side, this is fundamental to the way in which we're operating. Our agriculture colleagues now, climate-smart agriculture is a central part of that overall strategy, mobilizing, as Hart Schaefer said earlier, private sector financing and shifting our focus away from just our own direct investments to mobilizing the private sector, working with governments to get the policy environment right, and to ensure that we can simultaneously eliminate poverty and create a sustainable world is exactly the direction we're going in. So creating this opportunity for collaborative solutions and working together, I think the time is right. We've got the right people in the room. As Nike says, just do it.
Thank you so much. Can we please give these leaders and innovators a very warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you. Back to you, Femi.